Hello, welcome to another episode of Just Jesus. Today's story is a very familiar story to most of us, probably, and a very simple one, and yet a very powerful and moving story. Recorded in Luke chapter 7. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, Do not weep. Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearer stood still, and he said, Young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. Very simple, straightforward. Jesus sees a procession coming out of the city of Nain, and he goes up to the mother and he says to her, Do not weep. And so he touches the bier and he says to the young man, I say to you, arise. And the young man sits up. And Jesus gives him back to his mother. And one can imagine the woman's astonishment as this stranger comes up to her and tells her not to weep, to stop crying, don't worry about it, everything's going to be fine. And I'm sure she was just kind of befuddled and dumbfounded that this stranger would say these things to her. And then he has the audacity to touch the funeral procession, the bier, and they stop. And he speaks to the young man, and he says to the young man, Arise. And the young man sits up and begins to talk. And one can imagine her astonishment at seeing her son sit up and start speaking. And then as Jesus probably helps pick him up and gets him off the bier and stands him up, and then walks him over to his mother. And the reason he did this, according to Luke, was that he had compassion on her. He felt sorry for her. She was suffering. And we all know the definition of compassion is the concern for those individuals who are suffering and concern for those individuals who are facing some misfortune, but also coupled together with the desire to help alleviate the suffering or the misfortune. And that's why Jesus did that. He felt sorry for the woman. She was suffering. And he could alleviate that suffering. And so he did. It's not uncommon to listen to the news or to read it online and to hear stories about people who are being beaten in public in broad daylight, and other people just walking right on by, and other people seeing all of this stuff and not doing anything about it. Now, the reaction to this young man being raised from the dead was that the crowd around them said, A great prophet has arisen among us. And some were saying, God has visited his people. And yes, I'm sure they were astonished at seeing this dead man sitting up and speaking. And they glorified God because of that. But Jesus has also told us that if we will give somebody who is thirsty a cup of cold water in his name, we will be rewarded for that. And the great judgment scene in Matthew 25, when he talks about those people who have fed the hungry and given thirsty people something to drink and giving clothes to those people who need it and visiting those people who are sick and in prison. Those are the ones who are going to be rewarded. And when we do these acts of kindness because we have compassion on people who are suffering and we have the ability to help alleviate that suffering, when we do that, one of the reactions is a good work has occurred. And while people may not understand that we're doing that because of what God has done for us, and we appreciate that, the truth is God has visited his people when we help alleviate somebody's suffering. So let me encourage all of us not to turn a blind eye to those individuals who are suffering and to those individuals who are experiencing some misfortune. Let us too, like Jesus, have compassion and not only feel sorry for them, but if we have the ability to help alleviate that, then to help alleviate their suffering and their misfortune. Well, I pray that you'll have a great day.